Hey y'all, it's me again. I'm gonna continue reading from my book, The 1910s. What to do? The reasons for the raise. The question which everybody speculated about was why had Ford decided to pay $5 a day to men he could have had for $2? Whatever may have been the motives in Ford's mind before he took the step, and whatever the relative way of different reasons and a mixture of many motives that commonly lie behind any human action, Ford was now to learn the truth of the worldly counsel. Never give your reasons at the time of an act, because thus you preserve for yourself a mobility which enables you later to adopt any of the motives that others attribute to you, or that which best fits the unanticipatable conditions that subsequently arise. Ford, within 24 hours after his announcement, could accept any one of almost as many reasons as there were sources of comment. The head of the rival Commerce automobile factory attributed socialistic leanings to him, and the New York Times sent a reporter to ask him point blank and accusingly whether he was a socialist, and if it was true that his purpose was to prevent his son from inheriting a cloying fortune. At the other end of the gamut of imputed motives, a mass meeting of 500 socialists denounced Ford's act as a detestable trap. Ford, they unanimously resolved, had purchased the brains, life, and soul of his men by a raise in pay of a few dollars a week. The Socialist New York Call, seeing nothing to praise in any division of earnings between labor and capital, said it would be interested only when the working class decides to ease dividing with capital. The working class decides to... Between these extremes of alleged motive ran an infinite range. Ford sought the favor of labor. Ford sought advantage over manufacturers. Ford sought publicity for himself. Ford sought advertising for his car. And so on and so on and so on. Ford's own statement of his motive, given to reporters who called upon him in the spirit demanding an explanation for having done an unheard of thing, was that he had taken the step as a plain act of social justice. This answer was too offhand and simple to be acceptable as a carefully accurate statement of motive, which actually from little understood deeps of human psychology. Social justice was a rough and ready phrase at that time, much hackneyed by use as part of the creed of the Progressive Party. It would come naturally to anyone's lips, but it was rather too vague to explain so startlingly an original act. Ford's action could be regarded as a kind of unconscious expression of a deep and instinctive urge not understood by Ford himself. A more exact statement of his motive than he gave, and one not at all inconsistent with what he avowed, might say that the institution which Ford had built up and developed, like any living thing, a kind of cosmic urge of its own, and an instinct to survive and grow and come to fruit. That the institution sensed that if it were to expand, it must have a larger quantity of purchasers of the car it produced than was provided by the number of persons then able to pay for a car. That such new purchasers could only be created by bringing into the world the notion of paying larger wages to workers. And this urge of the institution to function expressed itself in an inner compulsion upon Ford to do the thing he did. In short, that Ford, the institution, took possession of Ford the man, expressing its will to live in the form of celebration on Ford's part that he called a hunt. That the step which the institution thus took was as much an instinctive act of nature as that of a tree reaching upward for sun, and that Ford, in throwing off into the world the idea of high wages for labor, was acting as instinctively, as blindly, and as inevitably on behalf of the institution which he was a part of, as the stamen of a flower when it sheds pollen upon the wind. This hypothesis would comport with what later came to be realized as a fundamental law of such institution as the Ford one, namely that mass production can only exist by being fed with a consistently increasing purchasing power on the part of labor. And if we accept the theory that mass production was a normal and logical step in the development of socialization, then this hypothesis would explain the favor with which the world received Ford and his idea. The 1919 World Series, a sad moment for baseball. Jeffrey C. Ward, America's favorite pastime, baseball enjoyed immense popularity as the nation approached the 1920s. The sport boasted talented individuals and remarkable teams. Few matched the credentials posted by the 1919 Chicago White Sox. But a stunning upset, the team lost the World Series, and rumors that the Sox were paid to throw the games proved true. Baseball took steps to repair its sullied image. In conjunction with noted television documentarian Ken Burns, author Jeffrey C. Ward explains why some of the Chicago White Sox so willingly agreed to lose the Fall Classic. The 1919 World Series between the Chicago White Sox and Cincinnati looked to be no contest. Chicago was one of the strongest clubs in baseball history. They were the best, said Chicago second baseman Eddie Collins, who had once played for Connie Mack's Championship Athletics. There never was a ball club like that one. The odds favored them 5-1. But things were not entirely as they seemed. On September 18, 13 days before the series was to start, Chicago first baseman Chick Gondo, I think that's how you say it, I don't know, summoned an old acquaintance to his Boston hotel room. Joseph Sport Sullivan was a small-time gambler who over the years had made a good thing out of the little inside tips that Gandil gave him. There was money to be made in knowing that a pitcher wasn't quite up to par on the day of a big game, or that a big hitter twisted things. Now Sullivan sensed something much bigger was in the wind. Gandil, I think it was, I don't know, was a rough customer, a former hobo boilermaker, a club fighter, 32 years old, nearing the end of his career, and eager for one last shot at some really big money before he had to get out of the game. For $100,000, he told Sullivan he and several of his teammates were willing to throw the World Series. There was nothing new in ball players working closely with gamblers. Many were rumored to supplement their incomes that way. And first baseman Hall Chase, most recently of the Giants, had made something of a career of it. Hanson was good enough to have become one of baseball's most popular stars. His friends called him Prince Hal. He was also unabashed about consorting with gamblers that 3 different managers publicly accused him of wrongdoing, and the fans took to cheer, "What's the odds?" whenever he took the field. Single games had been thrown before too, but dumping the World Series was something else again. Still, Gandil seemed serious, and the prospects for big profits from betting on Cincinnati were staggering. Sullivan hurried off to see if he could raise the money, while the first baseman went to work on his teammate. An unhappy team. The White Sox were an unhappy team. No club played better in 1919, but a few were paid as poorly or got along as badly. It was torn into 2 factions. "I thought you couldn't win without teamwork until I joined the White Sox," said Eddie Collins, whose relatively high salary and college education were both bitterly resented by his teammates. During pregame practice, no one threw the ball to Collins all season long, and Chick Gandil had not spoken to him for 2 years. Their owner was the old Roman, Charles A. Kaminsky, himself a former baseman and Players League rebel, but now among the game's most tight-fisted owners. He was too cheap to even pay to have the team's uniforms laundered, and his men had barely renamed themselves the Black Sox in 1918 after wearing their increasingly dirty uniforms for several weeks in protest. Chicago's two top pitchers, Claude Lefty Williams and right-hander Eddie Cicotte, had won 52 games between them that season. Gandil needed the cooperation of both men if his plot was going to succeed. Williams remembered how he was approached. The proposition to throw the World Series was first brought to me in New York City in front of the Anasonia Hotel. Gandil came to me and said he wanted a conference. He asked me if anybody had approached me on the 1919 World Series with the purpose of fixing it. I told him not yet. He asked me what I thought. I told him. I had nothing to say. He asked me if it was fixed. Would I be willing to get in and go through with it? I told him that I would refuse the answer right then. Eventually, Williams agreed to go along. Eddie Cicotte turned out to be interested too. He had his own special grudge against Kaminsky, who had promised him a $10,000 bonus fee for won 30 games. Then, when he won 29 games in 1919, held him benched just to keep her ever having to pay it. Cicotte wanted $10,000 up for him before he joined the conspirators. I needed the money. $10,000 to pay off a mortgage on a farm and for the wife and kids. I had to have the cash in advance. I didn't want any checks. I didn't want any promises. I wanted the money in bills. I wanted it before I pitched the ball. Gandil promised to get it up for him. The fix. On September 21st, Gandil assembled 7 players in his room in the Anasonia Hotel on Broadway's 74th Street. Williams and Cicotte, outfielder Happy Felch, infielders Buck Weaver, and Sweet Rigsburg. Utility infielder Fred McCollum cut over Gandhi talking to Rigsburg and demanded to be let in on the fix. And the idol of schoolboys all over the Midwest, Joseph Jefferson Jackson. He was called Shoeless Joe because they said he was one spot in the minors playing his stocking feet when new shoes proved too tight. A South Carolina catcher boy, he had hoped to be a pitcher till he broke his catcher's arm with a wind pitch and had been taught how to bat by a Confederate veteran who had learned his baseball from Union soldiers in a northern prison camp. This Spartari Joe Williams knew him fairly well. He was pure country, wide-eyed, gullible yokel. It was not surprising in those days to learn he had made a downbreak on the Brooklyn Bridge. He was a drinker and a very heavy one. He carried his own toddy, triple distilled corn, and on occasion he carried parrot. A multicolored patch, his vocabulary was limited to usually screeching, "You're out!" Jackson could either read or not write. Jackson could neither read nor write, a fact not lost on opposing fans. Once when he tired of hearing Andrex shouting, "Hey Jackson, can you spell cat?" Again and again, Jackson finally answered, "Hey mister, can you spell shit?" And Jackson broke it with Philadelphia, where Colin Mack recalled he had thoughtfully arranged for a more little boy to join the scene at the same time to read to him the menus and report to the game, but Jackson could hear 0.408911. It's right here in the starting 9.356 lifetime, the third highest average in history. His whole runs were called Saturday specials because most of the textile workers games to which he had got started had been played on Saturdays. Jackson hit these homers with a special 48-ounce Black Bessie of a history tree. Black Bessie made for him by a local lumberman from the north side of a hickory tree. He said he darkened with coat after coat of Jackson's tobacco juice. Ty Cobb himself thought Joe Jackson the greatest natural hitter I ever saw, and Babe Ruth would later say he modeled his own swing after Jackson. Coach Jackson and Gandelli offered him $10,000 for help, and during the series, he turned it down flat. When Gandhi upped the ante to $20,000 and was rebuffed again, Gandhi still shrugged. Gandhi just shrugged. The slugger could take it or leave it. The fix was on any case provided someone came up with the money. Someone did, although the evidence is murky and contradictory as to who it was. There were gamblers, including Sport Sullivan, Bill Murray, a serious figure who could have been Graham, Mark spelled backwards. Abe Attell, the former featherweight boxing champion and one-time Fox pitcher, Sleepy Bill Byrne. So that is That's a weather condition we can. But when Kilty got back to his hotel room that evening, he found $10,000. He demanded under his pillow. He sat up into the night, throwing the crisp green bills into the lining of his coat. The series opens. It was to be the best of 9 contest. Sports writer Hugh Fullerton, who had made his name as a baseball expert by picking the White Sox hitless wonders to beat the Cubs in the 1906 series, had heard enough rumors to think something very wrong. The lobby of his hotel was filled with gamblers. He'd never seen so many big bills changing hands so fast. He sent wire to all the papers that carried his column. I advise all not to bet on this series. Ugly rumors afloat. Fulton was joined in the press box by Christy Mathewson, who left the sanatorium where he had been fighting his losing battle against the damaged voice and gas had done to his lungs to cover the series for the New York World. Fulton followed him in on what he heard, and Mathewson agreed to help him find Judge if everything was on the up and up. That would be among the first little to see that it was not. Gillette would ordinarily master control in his first pitch to call reach, but first pitch to the Reds' second baseman Maurice Rath was a called strike, but his second pitch hit Rath right between the shoulder blades. It was a signal to his accomplices that the fix was on. Kelty caught an easy double play grounder, then seemed to throw it over Sweet Risberg's head in the fourth inning. Fed the Cincinnati batters enough fat pitches to score 6 runs before he was driven from the mound. Risberg ruined a double play of his own by failing to step on the bag, though he was not charged. with an error, while Joe Jackson, who had asked Kaminsky if he could be excused from the game at the last minute because he was not feeling well, seemed to throw wide from the outfield and deliberately to slow down to miss balls hit near him. Jackson would always deny he had ever done anything but play his hardest during the championships, and he cited the record book to back claim. He batted 3.375, drove in 6 runs, set a series record of 12 hits that was never charged with an official error. In any case, Chicago lost the first game 9-1. Charles Kaminsky was so shaken by his team's miserable showing that he knocked on the door of Van Johnson's hotel room long after midnight to share his fear that something was funny about the series. Johnson, who heartily disliked Kaminsky, ordered him to go. That, he shot, is the response of a bean cur. The players did not get the $20,000 in cash Gandil had been promised for losing Game 1. Rosenstein's agents claimed it was all on bets, but he and several others agreed to go ahead and throw Game 2 anyway, so long as the money for both games was in their hands by the end of the next day. Now it was Lefty Williams' turn to lose. He held the Reds to only 4 hits, but uncharacteristically walked 3 men in the fourth, allowing Cincinnati to score 3 runs. Chicago lost again 4-2. In the stands, Judge Kenesaw Mountain Landis was impressed enough with Cincinnati's play to tell the New York Times that the Reds were the most formidable machine I have ever seen. But beneath the stand after the game, the frustrated White Sox manager kicked Gleason trade string again. The catcher, very shocked, had to be pulled off Williams. 3 times, he said. Williams shook off my signals for curveballs. The scheme begins to crumble. The conspirators weren't happy either, for that night, Bruce Gandil went to see Ab Atta and demanded the $40,000 owed to him and his teammates for having thrown 2 games. Atta gave him just $10,000. The player felt betrayed and began to lose interest in continuing to risk their reputation. The third game was held in Chicago, and Dickie Kerr, a White Sox rookie, not in on the fix, threw a masterly 3-hit shutout to win it 3-0. Now it was the gambler's turn to feel betrayed. Bill Burns had lost all his winnings betting against his old team in Game 3. The Sox got even with us by winning that game. The Maghard. Remember, Burns and I lost every cent we had in our clothes. I had to hawk my diamond pin to get back to Philadelphia. Atoll now refused to advance the players another dime. They were untrustworthy, he said. But Sport Sullivan agreed to come up with $20,000 before the next day and another $20,000 as the White Sox lost it. Gandil took the money and split evenly among four of his fellow conspirators. Rigsburg, Flausch, Williams, and Jackson. Lefty Williams brought Jackson his money in a dirty envelope. When Shoeless Joe counted and saw that it was only $5,000, he asked what happened to his $20,000. That was all there was, Williams said. They'd all been the victim of a jazzing up by A.L. 2 men. McCollum and Weaver would never see a penny. Sadly, some of the 8 evidently continued to want to lose the next day. Cincinnati's Jimmy Ring pitched a fine game, but the Reds 2-0. Victory was at least in part due to critical fielding errors by Eddie Conker. For the first time, Hugh Fullerton committed his own growing suspicions to paper. There is no alibi for Kilty. He pitched a great game, a determined game, and one that would have won 9 out of 10 times, but he brought the defeat crashing down upon his own head by trying to do all the defensive work. He made the wall throw that gave the Reds their opening, the real one they had, and he followed that up by grabbing at a ball throw from the outfield and deflecting it past Scott, the catcher. A high flying flash. Wait, what? A high fly to left, blown by the wind over the head of Jackson, who was playing close in, followed, and Chicago was beaten. There is more ugly talk and more suspicion among the fans than there ever has been in any World Series. The rumors of crookedness of fixed games and plots are thick. It is not necessary to dignify them by telling what they are, but the sad part is that such suspicion of baseball is so widespread. Chicago lost game 5-0. Lefty ones gave up only 4 hits this time, but 3 of them came in a 4-run Cincinnati 6. The Reds needed only one more game to take the series. Kid Gleason was stunned by how badly his boys were doing. They're hitting. I don't know what's the matter, but I do know that something is wrong with my gang. The bunch I have fighting in August for the pennant would have trimmed the Cincinnati bunch without a struggle. The bunch I have now couldn't be a high school team, but the tide was about to turn. Still another promised $20,000 and now failed to materialize, and that's the White Sox rolled the train back to Cincinnati for Game 6. The conspirators evidently decided to abandon their plot. If there were no more money to be made by losing, they might as well win. They had all their contracts to worry about. After all, even Kaminsky would provide a bonus as they took the series. Chicago won the 6th game 5-4, thanks to critical 10th winning hits by Jackson and Gando. They also took the 7th 4-1. Gil Kikote was back in form, and Jackson and Happy Felch drove in all the Sox runs. The series now stood at 4-3. Chicago was just one game behind. Their fans began to hope, and most of the conspirators were not eager to pull out the victory that should have been theirs earlier. For the second day in a row, relieved, Kid Gleason told the press board about the night train bringing the teams back to Chicago. My gang played the kind of baseball it has been playing all season. Even though we are still one game behind, we will win for sure. Then gamblers mean business. But Gleason not counting on Arnold Wattenstein's continuing interest in the outcome. Mr. Bankroll was said to be very unhappy. He had been too shrewd to bet on individual games. His money was on Cincinnati to win the series, but now they seemed a real chance that there might be some risk even in that. Rothenstein did not like risks of any kind. He is said to have arranged to have a Chicago select known to history only as Harry F. Petty called him Lefty Williams, who was to pitch the 8th game. There was to be no 9th game, Harry F. told Williams. The series must end the next day. If it didn't, he continued. If Williams was still on the mound past the first inning, in fact, something is going to happen to you. And something might happen to his wife as well. Williams kept the threat to himself. The next day was all the Chicago County gave up 3 runs on 4 consecutive hits in the first inning. Was pulled from the game before he made 2 outs. Despite the fine hitting by and getting down Jackson, Chicago lost the deciding game 10-5. In the game, one Friday man had given the series to Cincinnati. In the New York World, Hugh Fulcher strongly hinted the series had been fixed. There will be a great deal written about the World Series. There will be a lot of inside stuff that will never be printed. The truth will remain that the team which had the individual ability spilled the dope terribly. So much so that an evil-minded person might believe the stories that have been circulated during the series. The fact is, This series was lost in the first game. Yesterday's, in all probability, is the last game that will ever be played in any World Series. As for club owners and those who have the interest in the game at heart have listed during the series, they'll call off the annual interleague contest. None of the owners wish even to consider such a thing. Probably many had grave doubts about the integrity of the series, but in public they were indignant at even a hint of suspicion about it. When Fulton later charged openly that Major League Baseball would besmirched with scandal. The story headline is Big League Baseball being run for gamblers with ball players in a deal. Reacher's Baseball Guide spoke for most of the owners. Any man who insinuates that the 1990 World Series will not honorably be played by every participant therein not only does not know what B is talking about, but is a menace to the game quite as much as the gamblers would be if they had the ghost of a chance to get in the nefarious worse. The controversy blows over. Charles Cominsky just wanted the whole business to go away. While he had himself feared the worst after the first game, he had a big investment in protecting the reputation of the team he'd built. When Joe Jackson, apparently conscience-stricken, had tried to see him right after the series to ask what he should do with the $5,000 he'd been given, Cominsky refused to let him into his office. Jackson then sent Cominsky a letter, dictated to his wife, of course, suggesting that some series games had been rigged, but Cominsky did not answer. Say stoutly defended his man. There is always some scandal of some kind following a big sporting event like the World Series. These yarns are manufactured out of whole cloth and grow out of bitterness due to losing wages. I believe my boys fought the battles of the recent World Series on the level, and I would be the first to want information on the country. I would give $20,000 to anyone under the sea, any information to that effect. The Sporting News, too, scoffed at the rumors and hinted darkly that they had been started by a conspiracy of Jewish gamblers, part of an alien attempt to subvert the national pastime. Because a lot of dirty, long-nosed, thick-lipped, and strong-smelling gamblers bought into the World Series. An American event, by the way. And some of said gentlemen got cross. Stories were peddled that there was something wrong with the way the gamblers were played. There will be no tickets for Cominsky's offer because there is no such evidence except in the mucky minds of the thinkers who, because they are crooks, think all the rest of the world can't play straight. The controversy finally died down. The 1920 season got underway, and other players on other teams evidently began to see the advantages of getting close to gamblers. There were rumors unsubstantiated but widespread of games being sold by players on the Giants, Yankees, Braves, Red Sox, Indians, as well as the White Sox. First steps to court. In September, a special Cook County grand jury was convened to look into allegations that the Cubs had thrown a 3-game series against the Phillies. The probes soon widened to include the 1919 World Series. Baseball is more than a natural game, the jury foreman said. It is an American institution, our great teacher of respect for proper authority, self-confidence, fair-mindedness, quick judgment, and self-control. To tamper with baseball was to tamper with the future of the American character. The White Sox were in close contention for the 1920 pennant when the grand jury began calling players and gamblers alike to testify about what happened the previous autumn. Eddie Cocotte was the first to come clean. I did it by not putting a thing on the ball. You could have read the trademark on it. the way I lobbed it over the plate. A baby could have hit him. Scott was wise the moment I started pitching. It did not look crooked on my part. It is hard to tell when a game is on the square and when it is not. A player can make a crooked error that will look on the square as easy as he can make a square one. All the runs scored against me and the 2 games I threw were due to my own deliberate errors. Joe Jackson confessed too in a colloquy with Assistant State Attorney Hartley Epidlod. Did anybody pay you any money to help throw that series in favor of Cincinnati? They did. How much did they pay? They promised me $20,000 and paid me $5,000. Who promised you the $20,000? Chick Gandol. Who paid you the $5,000? Lefty Williams brought it in my hotel room and threw it there. Does Mr. Jackson know that you got $5,000 for helping throw these games? She did that night, yes. What did she say about it? She said she thought it was an awful thing to do. She felt awful about it, cried about it a while. Chick Gandol, whose idea it all had been, admitted nothing. Arnold Rothenstein, the man whom F. Scott Fitzgerald say had tampered with the fate of 50 million people, asked to appear before the grand jury and indignantly denied knowing anything about any fix. He loved baseball, he said. It was the national game. Why, he'd once been part owner of a pool room with John McGraw and was now a business partner of Charles Stonehan, the latest owner of the Giants. If anything untoward had happened, he said, it must have been Abe Attell's doing. Rosenstein, who would move on to bootlegging, drug peddling, and labor racketeering, was eventually shot to death by a rival gambler whom he had accused of fixing a poker game. Attell, several other gamblers, and all 8 ball players were indicted for conspiring to defraud the public and injure the business of Charles Comiskey and the American League. There was no Illinois statute against throwing a game or arranging to have one fixed. All were acquitted for want of evidence after the transcript of Kilkee's and Jackson's testimony mysteriously vanished from the court files. When the verdict was announced, Chick Gandol, still unrepentant, shouted, I guess I'll learn Van Johnson. He can't frame an honest bunch of ball players. No one went to jail. Enter Judge Landis. Meanwhile, the scandal had so disillusioned the public that the owners felt compelled to take drastic action. They dissolved the old 3-man National Commission run by Van Johnson that had overseen the game in favor of a single independent commissioner who would be vested with extraordinary powers. They considered all sorts of candidates for the new post. Former President Taft, General John J. Pershing, and General Leonard Wood among them. But in the end, they picked Kenneth Shaw Mount Landis, a federal judge with a reputation for willful independence equaled only by his flair for self-promotion. Landis took baseball almost as seriously as he took himself. Baseball is something more than a game to an American boy, he said. It is his training field for life work. Destroy his faith in its squareness, and honestly, and you have destroyed something more. You have planted suspicion of all things in his heart. Born in Millville, Ohio, named for the Civil War battlefield on which his father lost his leg, Landis had preferred bicycling to baseball as a book. But for one race, he bought 20 Michelin